we're 2 years away from the NPT review conference, after what on paper looked like a result, and a good result in 2010. Of course, it's also in 2015 the 70th anniversary of the first use of nuclear weapons. And I think that should give us some pause for thought. 70 years is a good time to retire, maybe a little over the normal, but, you know, given the way things are going with longevity, 70 years seems about right. In 2010, we had the action plan of 64 points, plus the plan on the Middle East zone. It was spread across the 3 pillars. But I would say that in the negotiation, in the subsequent discussions, in the Conference on Disarmament, in the UN General Assembly, it's understood that there's clearly no intention in most of the nuclear weapon states' plans, anyway, to get rid of nuclear weapons. And there remains intentions in other states to perhaps mess things up for the proliferation issue. In the UK and the US, I would say there are mixed feelings, and there's quite a debate between those that would push down the disarmament route, and we're seeing President Obama come out with some more statements recently, and those that are very sceptical and are, you know, they're there, yes, that's a nice idea, but we don't really mean it. And I would say in France, there is absolutely no intention of ever going down to that point in the government, although I think in civil society it might be different. We see no intention also from Russia. And China has a completely different philosophy for nuclear weapons and is still on paper, at least, as being in favour of nuclear disarmament, and we shall see if that ever comes to fruition. So we have a phrase in English which can be expressed in 2 ways. One is all mouth and trousers, and the other is all mouth and no trousers. And they both mean the same thing. And it means all talk and no action. And I think that's the feeling about this treaty. And the trouble with the treaty, with any treaty, is if it is all words with no action, it's meaningless. It is just paper. If a treaty represents a contract, as someone said, that actually has force and is implemented, it's a different matter. And I would say that a large number of states parties to the treaty are deliberately manipulating this treaty to keep the status quo. Human beings tend to be quite happy with status quo. Even if they're unhappy in the moment, they fear what might come without it. They fear change. It's natural. It's the way we are. We can see ahead, we can see all the possibilities, the eventualities, we can see some good ones, but we can see some very scary options. And so we think that it's better to remain where we are. The problem is that if we're honest with ourselves, apart from the knowledge, the certain knowledge that we will die, there is one other constant in our lives, and that's change. Things do not stay the same. History moves on, people change. We see collapses of great institutions, of great powers. We see changes in politics, we see wars. We see famine, we see climate change. We know there will be change. So if we imagine we can keep the status quo, we are idiots. We are fooling ourselves. And it might feel comfortable in the moment, but it won't feel comfortable for your children and grandchildren. And if you're still alive, you'll be kicking yourself. So we have... Sorry? We have this problem right now, which we characterize by North Korea, India, Pakistan, Israel, and we have problems perhaps with other countries such as Iran taking routes that people are fearful for their intentions for the future. Now, this situation, in terms of there being no true disarmament progress and really wobbly non-proliferation progress, is understood by quite a lot of countries, several non-nuclear weapon states, and they have been trying new avenues lately. They've been trying to set up an open-ended negotiation in Geneva under the UN General Assembly. There's a high-level group, high-level meeting that's being set up to try and force the issue at a much higher level. And there's been recently a meeting in Oslo trying to reframe the issue from a humanitarian perspective. 127 countries turned up to that meeting, plus the UN, plus the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, and several large non-governmental organizations. And their approach is no stone unturned. If the Conference on Disarmament were working, there'd be no need for this. If the Non-Proliferation Treaty had teeth, had force, had energy, there'd be no need for this. The truth is they're not working. And they're facing that truth. So I think where we have a big problem, it seems to me, is that those countries that feel sensible and comfortable in the status quo wish to keep things as they are. And those countries that either feel uncomfortable in the status quo are forcing the issue through their own individual actions, or they're collectively working to try to make things better. Those in the state who feel comfortable in the status quo are resisting those efforts. Why would you, if you were in favour of nuclear disarmament, resist the efforts of people to get rid of nuclear weapons? Why would you not see what would happen, or at least encourage countries to be thinking along those lines? So what are the possible ways forward? Well, one possibility, of course, is that there is a sudden change of heart, prompted perhaps by something, or perhaps leadership from one country. And we get the full implementation, or the clear intention of full implementation, a lot of energy into the NPT action plan. And we get the WMD free zone process up and running. I would see that as fundamental to fulfilling the action plan. Now, it's not impossible to happen, but it would require real understanding and a realization of what is the coming reality. And then I think we would see real progress in 2015 at the NPT. We're not seeing the indications of that at the moment, and that's making many people very worried. The other possibility is to pursue a twin-track action, which is quite well supported by many countries, whereby you have the Conference on Disarmament, you still try to do things within that and hope for some breakthrough. You have the UN General Assembly First Committee, the UNDC, and keep on those tracks. And you try another track, which is the open-ended working group in Geneva. You start to build up momentum for a process which is, at least in the UN, at least based in Geneva, but has different rules. That's basically what it is. So it doesn't require consensus. And you use those rules to push through. So you use majority rules. And that has quite a lot of support. It's very hard to deny it. It got support in the First Committee. And one possibility is that you'll get some movement, some new ideas, and you might spur the Conference on Disarmament into action. It might interact favourably with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Another approach is to say, let's go back to some basics, some fundamentals, and ask ourselves, what is the purpose of what we're doing? We're trying to prevent the use of these weapons, first and foremost. That's the worst possible outcome of nuclear weapons. It's got to be right at the centre. You've got to put humanity right there in your decision-making. You can't think about these weapons as just purely political weapons, because they actually do go bang, and they do make an awful mess. I think the other thing that you have to think about with these weapons is that they're very old now. They're 1940s, 1950s technology. They're very clumsy. They do make an awful mess. You can't do specific targeting with them. You're lucky if you hit the city. They're not the weapons of today. They're not the weapons of use for today. What are they for? We've created, if you like, a mythology that surrounds them. We've created a sense of awe magic about them that gives them, we bestow on them some of our hopes and fears. We bestow on them the hope that they will prevent us from killing ourselves because they're too awful, we can't imagine them being used, and they'll prevent conflict. We bestow on them some idea that if we had them, they would stop us being attacked, or we could use them to leverage our political intent. In reality, no explosive weapon can do that. It's just a bomb. The most important thing about nuclear weapons to know is that they are highly explosive. We get very much into the issue of radiation, radiative energy, and really that's a very small part of nuclear weapons. The biggest part of nuclear weapons is the massive explosion. Each breaking of a nuclear bond is 1,000,000 times more than a molecular bond, and so you have a huge amount of energy. And that's the key thing. And when you think about them like that, they're just huge bombs. That's all they are. Put aside the radiation. It doesn't really count for that much. And I think we have to look them in the eye and understand that they're very old technology, that they're very big bombs, and that we can do much better than this in terms of weapons technology and in terms of our approach to our international relations. The idea that we would have to have such things owned by a few countries to prevent ourselves from going to war suggests that we think very little of ourselves as a species. So if we put the effects of these weapons at the center of our decision-making, if we put people there and the effects on people, and if we focus on no use and the prohibition of use and then the prohibition of possession in the same way as we have with chemical weapons, biological weapons, landmines, cluster munitions, and so on, we could start to change the game. And this is the basis of the Oslo approach, which is supported now by so many different countries. So what effect could that have if, say, we were to reframe this, we were to get into a different discussion where we stop thinking of these weapons as just political and symbolic of power, and we start to understand that they're just big dirty bombs that a few countries have and we ought to be able to get rid of because almost all countries in the world want to get rid of them. Well, how could that change things? Would it change the Israeli position? Would it change the Indian and Pakistani position? Would it have any impact at all on North Korea? My view is that it would probably change the India and Pakistani positions. Both India and Pakistan turned up to the Oslo meeting. They're clearly interested. The 5 nuclear weapon states did not turn up, although one of them wanted to, or made it clear right from the beginning that they wanted to, but changed their minds towards the end. Would it change North Korea? No. Because North Korea does not put people and the effects of weapons on people at the center of its decision-making. North Korea as a government doesn't put its own people at the center of the decisions that it makes. That's clear from its whole society. Do we want to be like North Korea? Is that who we want to be? Or do we, as societies, put our citizens at the center of our decision-making? Is humanity there at all? And I think that is the argument that we're going to be having up until 2015, and we'll see what happens then.